Welcome to the Myndcraft Dialogues, a podcast where we explore the transformative power of mindset in shaping success. I'm your host, Jitendranath Patri, and here we deep dive into conversations with some of the most inspiring and innovative minds, from entrepreneurs, coaches, CXOs, thought leaders, and change makers. In today's fast paced world, thriving isn't just about strategy or skill, it's about cultivating the right mindset. Each dialogue uncovers how resilience, adaptability, and a growth mindset have powered remarkable journeys and groundbreaking ideas. From personal breakthroughs to industry defining innovations, we'll try and explore the insights and stories that have driven meaningful change. This isn't just a podcast, it's a space to rethink, relearn, and rediscover what it takes to succeed. These are conversations that transform. Welcome to the show. I just love the poster there. Welcome to the episode, or the first episode of Myndcraft Dialogues. And today I'm thrilled to welcome a truly inspiring guest, Christian Ray Flores. Christian is an entrepreneur, a high performance coach, evangelist, and a philanthropist. And his journey is absolutely remarkable. He's also the co-founder of Third Drive Media, where he's raised millions for startups and led award-winning media projects. He also runs a coaching program called Xponential, where he works with leaders and he empowers them to thrive both in business and life. He also hosts a podcast called Headspace and has written a book called A Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America. I can go on and on, but I think I'd leave it to Christian to actually walk us through his absolutely fascinating journey and understand from him the power of resilience, purpose, adaptability, mindset. Right. So, Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And like we were discussing, I think earlier, I think it's good to have you as the first guest on my show. Your profile actually gave me the inspiration to change track and make it a lot more broader from what I was doing earlier and focusing on retail. You had a fascinating journey, right? And I would like you to just walk us through right from the childhood, where I remember reading about how you lived the life of a refugee as a young child. Yeah, how it really
Mhm.
shaped your life.
Yes, it did in profound ways. And I find that reconnecting, even with our hard, difficult experiences, can be an incredible catalyst for growth and success. And it's counterintuitive because for the longest time, this was just a story that happened to me, and I never spoke about it to anyone until I
Oh,
realized
okay.
there's a lot of power in it, both in the present and it can help other people. So I started talking about it more. It's fascinating how in human nature, we sweep some of the most valuable experiences under the rug because we don't consider them valuable enough for ourselves and others. But you're right. I was a refugee at age 5. I was born in Moscow, Russia. My mom is Russian, my dad's Chilean. And we moved to Chile when I was a baby. And 5, they had a military coup there, and a military dictatorship came to power, and they proceeded to arrest tens of thousands of people, imprison, torture, kill a bunch of people. And my dad was one of those people who was in a concentration camp, and they put him in soccer stadiums. So that was a fairly traumatic experience that I can go into in more depth if you'd like to. But what it did, it catalyzed my understanding of, I think, what humans can do to each other. It really fostered this very early imprint of, wow, there's a lot of injustice in the world. And it sent us traveling. So we ended up getting asylum in Germany. We spent a little bit of time there, went back to Russia when my mom wanted to go back home. And then eventually we made our way to Africa, to Mozambique, where my father received a contract. He was an expat there. And that's where I grew up. So 7 years, from 7 to 14, I was in Mozambique. And it was just a very dramatic change of everything, languages, cultures, ways of thinking, all of that. And then eventually we made our way back to Russia when my parents divorced, unfortunately. And that was another culture shock again, because it was the sort of probably the worst time in the Soviet Union when it comes to economics and things like that. And we, I got a really good education. I got a master's degree in economics. I spoke 4 languages by the time I was 9. And all of my friends were going into banking and finance, and I went into music. And very surprisingly, even to myself, I became one of the top pop stars in all of that space of 15 countries post-Soviet Union. And that was
Oh, that's
right
fantastic.
around when the whole thing fell apart. So it's 15 countries, but the same cultural space. All the TV stations, radio stations, the shows, everything was across that space. And that was my formative years that sort of took me quite literally around the world, three continents, four countries, from refugee to poverty to danger. I saw a lot of political unrest, social unrest in all three countries, actually, except for Germany. And then my first sort of entrepreneurial success was the artistic career that I had for about a decade. And then we moved to the States with my wife and three children, and I had to start over basically. And the beautiful thing about being here is that there's so much opportunity, so much acceptance of immigrants that I was able to start three different companies, two nonprofits. Not all of them were successful, but just to start over again and again and being able to reinvent and pivot, it was something that I was able to do here in the States. And a lot of those early experiences really created the ability to do so. I think that's one of the things that I teach in performance coaching is the ability to be creative, the ability to sustain difficulties and hardships, the ability to pivot, which all essential skills for entrepreneurial success.
Fantastic. In fact, I want to ask you this. The Your early experiences as a child, right, could have made you go towards an extreme, either extreme.
Absolutely.
What centered you?
It's a mystery, I think, honestly. I don't think I have this one perfect answer, but I do know I feel like I know what the dynamics are of it. And my theory is that you can choose to be a victim, even if you are a victim, but you can choose to not remain a victim.
Right.
And that's a mindset shift, right? It's a decision you can make. You actually do have a choice whether to remain a victim or to heal and move on, right? That's one. The other one that I've noticed as a trend, not only in my life, but in other people's lives, is that negative experiences can be a detriment and a limitation, or it could become fuel. So knowing what you don't want to experience ever again is an incredible, powerful driver. It can actually drive you for life. And tapping into understanding in a positive way, understanding the negative motivation, it's actually brings very positive change, right? The other thing that I notice as a very specific pattern across the so many people I've worked with is that if you deal with a lot of uncertainty in your life, you become much more comfortable with uncertainty. And uncertainty is literally the default mode of any new endeavor. It could be artistic, it could be writing a book, starting a music career, or starting a business. Uncertainty is literally what you're stepping into on purpose, right? So most people either don't even step into it in the first place, or they just cannot endure it for
Right.
any, so they just give up. So one of the byproducts, positive byproducts of having so much uncertainty in life is that you become very comfortable with uncertainty and not afraid of it. So you step into it over and over again with almost like this sense of calculated optimism, but you also can endure and not give up, where most people will.
Fascinating point you raised, the point of uncertainty. I think currently we're all living in that world, in uncertain world right now, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
Whether it's
Yeah.
in technology change or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Did that shape you? The fact that you, as a child, there are two questions here that really, points that really come up. One is the fact that you raised the point of not being a victim. How did you realize that I shouldn't be a victim? I need to maybe build that strength, build that resilience, whatever, and then see how I can actually convert my negative experiences to more positive one.
I think it was very intuitive, as you can imagine, right? Because
Right.
you're not smart enough at that age to really meditate your way into it. I think it's really intuitive. And what I remember is this. What I remember is if you lean into hardship and lean into the difficult things that happen to you around you. For example, I had to change four countries by age 7.
Wow.
I was so confused that my dad was worried about me, and he said he tells me that I went silent for about a year when we landed in Africa because of the all of the changes. And he would ask me, "Why don't you speak in public? Like you're very quiet." And I said, "Dad, I feel like I'm incapable because I don't know the right language and I don't know how to navigate this." And so that was the starting point, if you think about it, right? So you're paralyzed a little bit, you're scared, you're a bit anxious, self-aware, but you lean into it just a little bit and try to learn. And what happens is when you learn, you get progress. And when you get progress, you get confidence. Your sort of self-esteem goes up a bit. And I think that's the mechanism to go from victim to victor is leaning into the hard things and dealing with it rather than trying to escape. Because that always gives you this optimism that comes from, oh, you know what? I can survive sudden changes or uncertainty or risk. And then as I survive and I start developing new skills, I can grow very quickly. And that basically gives you this momentum. And the interesting thing is that you can replicate that in anywhere at any time with anyone. When I coach people, I basically teach them how to do hard things in a very measured way, but every single day. And it produces the same exact result, which is really fascinating.
Fantastic. I think what you're speaking about, or what you just narrated, I think also dovetails into something called the growth mindset, right? And if you've read the book by Carol Dweck, I think if I
Mhm.
got the author mindset, I'm sure you would have.
In fact, I
Yeah.
interviewed one of the top partners of her,
Oh, okay.
and he's the top researcher, one of the top guys in the field. His name is David Yeager.
Hmm.
And so
I
I
think
have
I've
an
heard his
interview with
name.
him on my
Yes.
podcast. So he's a good friend. Actually, he lives in Austin.
Okay. Lovely.
And so there's a lot there that's fascinating research.
Interesting. The other point I want to raise is the point of uncertainty. How much of that, the fact that you knew, the fact that you became so uncomfortable, so comfortable with uncertainty, how
Mhm.
much did you help? How much did it help in your entrepreneurial journey?
I think it helped a lot. And
I'm
again,
sorry.
it can happen to you, uncertainty over uncertainty. So you don't have a choice but to decide what to do with it. But you can actually also, in a very intentional way, get yourself very comfortable with it. And for me, I think it was fascinating the providential nature of how my first entrepreneurial success came about is imagine you change country after country after country. So I spent 7 years in Mozambique, so I was already settled in, very happy, and then everything changes again.
Right.
And it was like right around my teenage years, I was 14 years old. Now I'm raised by a single mom, and I'm in this terrible place called the Soviet Union. A lot of scarcity. There's zero entrepreneurial activity because it's actually illegal. A lot of censorship, just Iron Curtain stuff, right? I think so many people that were born after the era have no idea how bad it was, and
I can only
especially for someone who grew up outside of it,
outside.
right? You go into it and you go, "Oh, this is really terrible." For people inside, that's all they know, right? So they settle into it, but and then and you at the time, the Soviet Union was one of the two major superpowers on the planet. And you never thought in the wildest dreams that the thing will fall apart. And sure enough, the year that I graduated from college with a master's degree in economics, the whole thing falls like a house of cards. So imagine sort of the level of uncertainty that comes from that again,
Right.
right? And I think for me, it was good uncertainty because it went from very restrictive,
Mhm.
very limiting, it's a land of mediocrity and no opportunity, to complete free market chaos where opportunity it's all there is. So it went from a certainty of mediocrity. It's just nothing will ever change and I have no social mobility up here to social mobility happening in both directions, by the way, all over the place. People were literally experiencing hunger and other people were becoming rich
Right.
overnight. And for me, that was the window where I had to choose. And I just chose opportunity. I just chose that I'm going to pursue the maximum opportunity there is. And I just was the right place at the right time with the right mindset, with the right work ethic. And I was literally on national television by the end of year one of trying, which is very abnormal, I think, for musicians in general.
In fact, I think also if you if I have to look back at myself and a lot of people I know, I think we all get into what is called the comfort zone. right? Where we assume that things are certain.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's actually an illusion of certainty because there is no such thing as certainty actually, in absolute terms.
And when you were going through all this, is that when you developed resilience, or is this something that you thought was inherent and it just helped you, overcome all of these?
I think it was both slowly developing, almost like under the surface, just from exposure to hardship, right?
Right.
It's like going to the gym. You go to the gym, you don't really see muscles growing. But if you stay going 2, 3 times a week, in 3 months, you'll see differences. So it's like that on an emotional level. That's how it develops, I think, over years. I think that's only one aspect of it. And the other one is really as an adult, who are you allowing yourself to imitate in their lives? And I think the that's probably the other factor is apprenticeship, right? If you're around the right people,
Mm.
you will their energy, their vitality will rub off on you. And I just put myself in situations around people who were upwardly mobile, excited, bold, courageous in their choices. And I observed them keenly. And I started just imitating their way they think. And that really, I think, made a big difference as well. So apprenticeship, that's why I do coaching. Coaching is apprenticeship, basically. And
Yeah.
you can read all the books in the world. You can actually now today, like no other time in the history of humanity, you can get a Ivy League education just by watching YouTube videos.
Mm.
Like all of that is completely 100% accessible and free. What's not accessible, it's apprenticeship, it's implementation. And that cannot be replicated by a book or a course or a YouTube video. It just can't. So you have to be around people who can energize you that way.
So I'm glad you raised that point, because I wanted to ask you, did people play a role as you were growing up, right? And the right
Hmm.
kind of people, because it's very
Yeah,
easy to
yeah.
slip and go onto the other side and go
Hmm.
down the wrong path. And I'm also very intrigued to know a little more about the exponential program that you really run. You speak to a lot of, I'm sure you must be speaking and coaching a lot of leaders.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
And they can be young leaders or can be very sort of senior leaders as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's a range there.
And given this diversity, what do you think is leadership?
I think leadership is doing what most people, being willing to endure more tension and more ambiguity
Mhm.
and taking courageous action where most people won't. That's
Why does
leadership.
that
It's
happen? And why does it happen? Why are there only certain people who do that?
it's a mystery, I think, to me. I think there's a divine spiritual dimension to it where there's people, you need only so many people to lead, only so many people to do certain tasks or have certain abilities. And I think there's definitely a spiritual dimension to where humanity is perfectly designed to assume certain roles in life and in society and culture and
Okay,
community.
interesting.
So that's one theory.
Hmm.
Let's think of it as a top-down theory, right? The bottom-up theory could be that we are very primal beings, whether we
Hmm.
like to admit it or not, and our primitive instincts are always to conserve, to diminish risk. Our brain's primary function is to avoid suffering. It's very primal. And only a few people can override that default because they understand that the dangers that we feel the danger of risky behavior or doing something new. The fear of failure comes up, fear of rejection comes up. All of those sort of inner, very primitive mechanisms of imposter syndrome, all of those things, everybody has them, even the top of the top. All of them
Right.
have them.
Mm.
The leaders are the ones who can turn them off, turn these things off, and know how to manage those things. And most don't, basically. They just do what their primitive brains tell them to do. So that's a biological, perhaps, or evolutionary
Mm.
explanation.
And why do the leaders turn it off? Are they so self-aware? Are they
I think so. I think that something sparked in them, self-awareness, right? Curiosity. When your curiosity is more than your fear, you
Mhm.
start trying things. When you start
Right?
trying things, you get what I mentioned. a bit earlier, momentum it creates this upward almost draft for you, where your sense of self-worth, sense of possibility, opportunity becomes very pronounced. But that always comes from momentum, right? And momentum can be very slow in the beginning. So it's
Right.
almost like I think it's a sliding scale. It's a very slow process. I think leaders develop from the curious ones who try something and then they have a very moderate, almost invisible success. And then they keep trying and then they get more visible success. And eventually they start recognizing patterns, right? And going, oh, if I do this will happen. If I don't do that, this will happen. And they develop what we now call leadership qualities, is making
Right.
these bold choices, seeing with beyond what other people can see, trying things that other people wouldn't try, questioning the status quo, having this ongoing, almost like a spirit of curiosity and zeal and drive. I think that's how it develops. That's my theory.
And interesting attributes you listed there, which kind of wants me to ask you, does that also mean that a good leader who has those attributes can actually be a good entrepreneur or vice versa?
I think so. I think leaders are entrepreneurial. All leaders are entrepreneurial. And then now, will they be like solo start good founders? Not necessarily,
Okay.
perhaps. But I think all of them are entrepreneurial in the sense that the word entrepreneur comes from the French entreprendre. I'm butchering the pronunciation,
Okay.
but it's basically to endeavor something new. So in that sense, a leader is an entrepreneur because a leader goes somewhere where they haven't been before. They lead an organization somewhere where they haven't been before. So that's entrepreneurial activity. But a leader could be, let's say, could be an extraordinary leader and very entrepreneurial within a large corporation, but they've never built something from nothing. So in some ways they are entrepreneurial, but in other ways they are not founders, let's say. And that's maybe a slightly different animal, a subset of leader. And maybe the founder, I would say, if I've worked with quite a few tech founders, for example, startup founders. I really see no difference between a founder entrepreneur and a musical artist or a writer.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically the artists, they're the dreamers of this
Mm-hmm.
world because they can imagine something no one else is seeing yet, and they're willing to take the risk, knowing that the odds are very low of success. And they're the crazy ones, basically, the
Yeah.
founders.
Interesting. I think you're reading my mind because I wanted to ask you the next point was whether, since you were talking about momentum and you were talking about the fact that leadership is so very critical and the qualities and entrepreneurs challenge status quo, because as an artist, especially someone who goes on stage and sings, it's really literally, I think it's just you and your talent,
Yeah.
and you're trying to build that into something much bigger. So whether that I had a connection that has a connection to your entrepreneurial journey.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that a singer or painter or writer, aspiring writer, or founder of a tech, there's all the same.
Mhm.
I think it's the same set of qualities, right? I remember the bifurcation of my life. I have a good education. I speak four different languages. I'm very well traveled. I go to banking. I could go to international trade. I can go into all kinds of places that are much safer, higher probability of success, but not unique. I'm not
Right.
creating something new. And then somewhere, something in me says, but maybe you can do something completely new. And you start creating music, and it's very bad music first. It's because it's never been done. You've never been done. You're not a master. You're talented, perhaps. You have a set of things that are you're strong in, and others that you're not.
Right.
And there's so much to it, so much more to it. Because if it's just music to play with, so for your friends in a garage or something like that, it's one thing. But if you are trying to appeal to a broader market, then you have to learn marketing and branding and positioning and what do people want. You need to understand what the pulse is of where's the demand, how's the product market fit, right? In retail terms, you can apply that to
Yes.
music very
Mhm.
easily. It's the same thing if you want to do popular music, and you have no idea if it's going to fit. You have no idea. It's new, right? You've never sold it before.
Right.
And so it just takes a lot of passion, a lot of vision, a lot of crazy, actually. And gradually you start shaping something and getting feedback and shaping it and getting feedback. And
Mm.
then all of a sudden you see demand. And in music, for example, it's a small club. I rehearsed like a few songs with my band, for months and months. And then we auditioned in this club that was like the most fashionable club in Moscow at the time. In the very beginning, where there was no other, there was like maybe three clubs in the whole city of a many millions of people. And it was like one of the three top ones. And I auditioned there and they hired me on the spot. And I worked there for 6 months. And then the first people, the first fans show up, right? And they come back just to listen to us. Okay, the market is responding, and how can we make it better? And we have no money. And it's just this very painful process of momentum on a very small level. And then the thing is, when you go from small momentum, slow speed, it's still painful because you have no money. If you have a first success, like a quantum leap of some sort, right? Then it's more money, but it's also more pressure. There's more at stake. There's more complexities. Now you have to manage a staff, right? Now you have to figure out press relations and public opinion and PR and what are people saying about you and how do you not do something stupid so it doesn't like ruin your career. And when you do something stupid, how do you navigate that? So that's the process and it's completely different, but momentum is going up and up and up. And
Right.
I think part of the work that I do with entrepreneurs that are in a more advanced space, that they're masters of their craft, when there's millions, and sometimes billions of dollars at stake, is that their inner game becomes way more crucial than their outer game because their outer game is already high, but their ability to navigate the higher risks is crucial for the success of their endeavor. And the inner game, the world will not really recognize your inner game. You're not rewarded for it. You're not incentivized to develop it. So that's the weakest spot of the high achiever, right? They have incredible outer game. So let's say it could be singing, dancing, choreographing, or writing, or painting, or creating plays, or engineering, or coding. That gets rewarded a lot. You get a lot of positive feedback and incentive. They'll give you more money, more status, more staff, more whatever, right? But the inner game is invisible. It's always under the surface, and no one rewards you for that. So you have to be self-aware enough to actually invest in it. And that's where the coaching comes in, where we work on the inner game so it can match the outer game. And then the two are equally developed, then you're unstoppable, basically.
If you could just maybe get a little more explicit about the inner game, what is it exactly? What is this inner game?
Oh, sure. It's all these things that make you the main asset for your organization, right? You can replace an engineer, you can replace a salesperson, you can replace even a CXO. If it's just this on generic, there's equally experienced or educated people, but you cannot replace someone who brings life into any room that they step into, someone where people follow you because you inspire them. Someone who could develop, for example, a team atmosphere where there's high challenge, but also high support, that ability. And then if you go deeper and deeper on a personal level, is how can you see the complexities of any successful endeavor that happen inevitably every single day. There's something, there's a fire to be put out, right? Or there's a crisis, small or big, that arises because a client is unhappy or a certain team member is leaving, et cetera, et cetera. Or there's some sort of flaw in the code and we need to fix it. Those are things that are just inevitable in any endeavor that is succeeding and full of life. So if you fold like a house of cards because of those crises, you're not going to have that vitality.
Right.
But if you can get yourself from stressed, anxious to creative and excited and visionary on demand, meaning you wake up, you get that bad phone call, in about an hour, 2 hours, you're fine. You process it, you understand how to recalibrate yourself, emotionally self-regulate, and then you attack the problem rather than blaming somebody or imploding yourself or creating something that's worse, creating a more crisis. That is the inner game. And that is the secret sauce of a great leader. It's the vitality, something that you can't just hire into the
Yeah.
organization. It makes you irreplaceable. It makes
Right.
you the very life of the organization.
Yeah.
That's what I'm interested in.
Absolutely. And a lot of, I think passion and purpose does play a pretty key role there. Would I be right in saying that?
I think so. Look, if there's got to be someone in your organization who dreams and breathes that, and
Mm.
who creates motion, forward motion. Because about 80% of the people in your organization inevitably will be people that execute. So they don't really wake up every morning with a passion and a dream. They are taking their piece of the work and they do it diligently and do it well, hopefully. Life is such that any endeavor you develop will bump against inner dysfunctions or disruptions,
Right.
outer disruptions. It could be the market, it could be a competitor, it could be a key core client who is unhappy, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just inevitable. It's just life. So having someone needs to have a vision that is beyond that crisis and that danger to develop the solutions and to say to everybody else, hey, we're going to be great. We're going to be better because of it. And 80% of people or more will never have that sort of heart posture. They just won't. So you need that person. Who is that person?
And does that person always have to be the founder or the co-founder or the entrepreneur or the leader himself or herself?
I think a co-founder probably in the
Mhm.
sense that actually the best companies, in my opinion, are usually partnerships because really not one single person has the it factor
Right.
usually.
Right.
And also it's also less of a burden on one person where everything starts and stops with the person. So I think partnerships are great and developing a team of visionaries at the very top, I think that's a tremendous strength, right? Because ambitious people are also not very collaborative. So the gift, the super sort of leader is the person who actually attracts the most ambitious people and helps them feel collaborative and heard and
Mm.
respected. And they understand how they fit in and they like it. And that's a very rare quality to have.
Quality, true. And also brings me to a point when as you speak, because of the drive, because of the passion most of these have, the leaders and entrepreneurs have, obviously they must be at the back of the mind thinking about failure, right? So how do you overcome the fear of failure? And I'm asking you because I'm sure you, because of the kind of experience that you've had.
I think, and the thing is, there's probably failure, the fear of failure evolves, right? And the fears, it's the same core fear. Really, at the very core of that fear is the fear of rejection.
Mhm.
So it's very
Interesting. Okay.
primal. It's very primal. At the very core of fear. It's not actually failure. It's how do people think of me? It's not failure, but when I fail, will they reject me? Will they say, I always knew this was a big mistake, or I always knew this guy is just full of it, right? He's not competent, all of that. And that's really the core fear, I think. But it just changes shape, I think. In the beginning, it's, hey, if I don't I'm running out of my investment money. If I don't get an investment in the next 3 months, that's it. We're done. We're folding our startup. It's
Mm.
that kind of thing. It's the make it or break it. It's really the loss of the venture itself that is the big thing, or even the fear of we have no traction now, and I realize now that maybe we'll never will. I think the most dangerous type of fear is fear of failure when you've already achieved something. And I'm more interested in that. I'm equally interested in how do you start something from nothing and survive and actually succeed. But once you do succeed, you have mastery in that thing. And the downfall of any master, any true master has status, has respect, perhaps some money, has achievement, is that they stop questioning the status quo.
Mm.
Why? Because they are afraid of what's going to happen if they start shaking the tree or rocking the boat, whatever you want to call it. Why? Because now they're afraid to lose status.
Mm.
So what will they think of me, my fans, my clients, my buyers, my writers, my readers rather, if I do this new thing, if I pivot because I have this deep understanding that we need to evolve, but I'm not going to make that move because of the fear of what I can lose. So they have too much to lose. And the minute you have too much to lose to take action is when you stagnate. The minute you have too much to lose to make any change, a competitor that doesn't have anything to lose will take you out,
Right.
basically, you know. So that's how the masters lose their flame, their inspiration, is status quo. They stop
Yeah.
questioning the status
Which
quo.
is very interesting actually, because someone who possibly may have had a lot of drive and momentum in initial years and suddenly reaches a kind of a plateau. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think pivot it in being training yourself to not settle
Yeah.
for the status quo is really a secret of a successful and happy life, a fulfilling life. And I think that's that danger zone of status is that's it. That's the death of a leader in the long run. And but I left my music career at the peak of my career, which is very stupid and foolish from some in some dimension,
Mhm.
and widely perceived as such, by the way, by many of my peers, my crew, some of my friends. But for me, it was just I realized that I wanted more out of life than just a career as a musician for the rest of my life. And I was just in a train ride one day and I thought, is this all there is for me? That was a question that I had in my mind. And it was a very strange feeling because I was living the dream of most musicians that most musicians probably won't achieve. Statistically, they won't. Most of them won't. And then I have it, and then there's some part of me that is dormant, that is unsatisfied. And I was able to question the status quo basically in that moment. And I was able
Right.
to say, you know what, in 20 now I'm writing it and I maybe I can coast for another 10 years. But if I do that in about 20 years, I'll be very unhappy. And I would rather not coast now and be very happy in 20 years. And yes, it's going to be painful and there's so much uncertainty, but I would rather do that because I'm devoted to being the best self, my full self in everything I do. And I will question the status quo, basically. So that quality, I think, is very important. As a matter of fact, my clients come to me because they haven't, a lot of them come to me
Mm.
because they didn't question the status quo early enough. And now they're a bit stuck and maybe they've hit a plateau and they need a little bit of help with clarity and recalibrating life. So it's the result of that, right? It's not
Right.
questioning the status quo that brings them to me in the first place.
But I'm glad they realize it, right? I'm glad because
It's never too late. It's
yeah,
never too late.
yeah.
Yeah.
And by doing that, I think you add a lot more spice to your daily life. You look forward to doing something new, something different,
Yes,
even if it is
exactly.
something
Yeah.
really small. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't have to be grandiose.
Yeah.
Not every turn in life has to be this massive public success. As long as it feeds the very core of who you are and fires them up, it's worth looking into for sure.
Interesting. So from singer, and then you obviously gave it up and then started your entrepreneurial journey.
I could argue that the music career was my first entrepreneurial journey. I just didn't stay in that one.
Mm.
So I've switched 5 different careers
Oh,
over
okay.
my life. So I guess
So
it's one
yeah,
of those things. I always
yeah.
question if this is the right thing for me to do right now.
Are you still doing that now? Are you
I
still
think so.
questioning? Yeah.
Even the latest one is the coaching. And I've done coaching for a long time, but I shifted into full-time, hyper-focused, structured, very intentional coaching after managing and owning a company that I still own. It's a digital media brand strategy company.
Mhm.
And that shifted with a season of life. And that's another piece that I think you and I haven't discussed yet is that what works for you in your 20s and 30s won't work for you in your 40s and 50s. And the same exact thing that made you super happy and excited will make you dissatisfied actually when the season changes. And what I've seen as a pattern, very distinct pattern, is that there's four main seasons in adult life. One is the student. You're
Mhm.
in college. You're looking from the outside in. You're not really doing life. You're learning about life. Then you become a practitioner. So now you're in life and you're developing professional skills, interpersonal skills, all of that. Then you become a master when you get the respect, the status because you're good. You're at the top 10% of your whatever space. And then you become a sage. And those are the 4 seasons. And at the intersection of between the seasons, that's where you feel a little lost, a little disoriented and plateaued because you're being essentially incentivized to lean into your next season of life. And that's always a change.
The way you described it, I actually was playing it out the way my few last few years have been, and there's a lot of synergy in what you're saying. I just didn't
So,
see it that way. That's all.
so what season are you in now?
I think more or less sage
Um,
because I'm now more involved in mentoring, in a bit of teaching.
and it brings you more joy,
It
right?
brings me more joy, absolutely.
And certain
And
things that you did before when you were in a mastery season don't bring you any joy anymore.
Not at all. Absolutely no. And
Exactly.
yeah, and I'm questioning myself, say, hey, did I even do something like that? Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
So
was something
that's the
like that.
thing. So
Yeah,
it you go from practitioner to master, and you really enjoy the building, the hustling, the people managing, the crisis management, all of that. You really enjoy it because you're a
right.
master of this. And then you start losing actually taste for it, you know? And some people can interpret it as, oh, you're getting old, you lost the touch. And it's not that at all. You're just changing seasons. And what fires you up yesterday is not going to fire you up today.
That's a beautiful way of seeing it, a very philosophical way of seeing it, and very spiritual way, I think.
I think so too.
Brilliant. And so, what next for you, Christian? You've literally done a lot of things, right?
I
You've
have,
been
yeah.
through a lot of experiences. I know. I was reading one of your newsletters where I think you wrote about the book, and you said
Hmm.
why the book meant so much to you because of what.
That's right. I'm definitely in the sage season for sure.
Right.
And the way it's expressing itself in is basically pouring into other people, right? So
Mm,
sharing wisdom, training, building somebody up. And for me, the coaching piece is becoming a catalyst for world changers. That's my that's what makes me very happy is if I can find the right people who really want to, who feel that same zeal to transform something, right? It could be small or big, it doesn't matter. They have that that fuel, that rocket fuel, and I'm really good at helping them
mm,
be at the peak of their abilities for an extended period of time. So that's a passion of mine. And then the book that I wrote, this is the first one. That's again an expression of sage, right? I wrote a book called Little Book of Big Reasons to Love America, and it just was really born very organically from growing up in. I've lived in 6 countries. This is my fourth continent, and I've there's a certain set of qualities about American culture that have always fueled me even before I moved here because of books and movies and inspiration. And somehow I recognized it. And even my first career in music was in the other side of the world in post-Soviet Russia. But I had a very American approach to it because
mm.
I've learned it from a distance, right?
Right.
Okay, it's the work ethic, it's the excellence, it's creativity, it's entrepreneurship, it's the business side of things. I was very interested in that. And it actually propelled me to success because of almost like an American spirit about it.
Mm,
And then eventually when I married an American, I moved here, I realized that there's a very interesting, almost like alignment of stars in the culture here, that in combination, this create a very vital culture, right? Because it's immigrants, it's this, everybody's from somewhere else. Old ways are not really ossified here, as
right.
they are in many ancient
Mm,
places. And then faith, the spiritual aspect is very dynamically in the DNA. Charity, philanthropy is very much for example, in Western Europe, the state is supposed to do the charity. That's the default thinking. In the US, people are supposed to do the charity. It's expected, almost like a social responsibility. So there's a generosity about American culture, entrepreneurship, that everything's possible, the pursuit of happiness, grit. It's culturally not only acceptable, glorified even. Like you are an overcomer, that kind of thing. So all these things together create a climate where there's a lot that you can do if you like that kind of culture. And because I was inspired by that culture from afar, but I grew up in very restrictive cultures.
right.
I'm particularly grateful for the contrast. And because I'm grateful, I kept talking to my wife, Deb, oh, this is amazing and that's amazing. You need to understand that this is not normal anywhere in most places on earth.
Mm.
So she eventually said, just write a book about it. Stop,
Oh,
bothering me
fantastic.
with this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's basically the genesis of the book.
Super. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. And before I let you go, just one last question. The younger generation today, or the Gen Zs, or whoever, whatever you call them, the Gen Zs and the
Yeah,
Gen Alphas, or whoever, come with very different mindsets.
I do. Hmm.
Your suggestions or advice to them in managing uncertainty and building resilience.
I think so. I had this actually question I asked that question to David Yeager that I mentioned before. He's essentially a leading expert in growth mindset. And
Okay.
he wrote a book about young people, essentially, growth mindset in young people
Oh,
specifically.
okay.
I think it says growth mindset 13 to 21, something like that. butchering it a little bit, but that's the gist of it. And I said, what do you think? Is there like a generational, almost like archetype with Gen
Mm.
Zs? Because I think it's very normal for us humans to put people in buckets just because it's easier to label somebody and
Right.
say, all of you Gen Zs are this, or all of
Mm.
you boomers are this, or all of you Gen Xs are this. I'm Gen X. And we create these categories because it's easier to assign somebody to that. And on one hand, we create the categories because we fit the categories. Look, there is an overarching, almost like spirit of boomers were like this. Why? Because they grew up in a very specific socioeconomic context, historical context, et cetera, et cetera. It shaped them as a generation. On the other hand, it doesn't really change. Human nature does not change. So some of those stereotypes are really more stereotypes than reality, right? So it's almost like astrology. Like, you're a Pisces. This is what we have in common. Not really. And so I asked that to David Yeager, and he said the same thing. He said, you know what? No, human nature doesn't change. There's certain sort of trends that might influence, but really they're very thin. And actually, I really see almost like an experiential proof to that in my children. So I have a millennial and I have a couple of Gen Zs. I have three daughters. And honestly, all three of them, they were exposed to some of the sort of cultural forces of their time, but they really didn't succumb to them.
Mhm.
So all three are not fragile. They're very resilient. They've gone through some hard things, all three in different ways. They're all entrepreneurial. They're all highly functional, charismatic. I'm literally not worried about their future at all. And I think the reason for that is because the presence of their parents and how we invested in them over time.
Right.
That's really the biggest factor
Sure.
rather than a generational sort of factor. And from as a father, I don't see that as an overarching factor, the generational, the Z, the letters basically. I see parenting as the main factor. And just like you said, the what happens is, I keep forgetting the author of the saying originally because it gets quoted so much, is that weak people create hard times, and hard times create strong people, and
True.
strong people create good times, and good times create weak people. And so the cycle goes.
Goes.
So for us, with our children, we created hard times, especially we exposed them to hardship
Hard times. Yeah.
from very beginning, from cradle. So they didn't get participation prizes. They didn't get a praise for no reason. They got unlimited love, but that's very different from praise for no reason. We were present with them in their hardships. We're not absent parents or unavailable emotionally parents. So we were there to give them both the challenge and the safety of parental love. And they also traveled the world. So we made some very crucial decisions in life where they would go to places like a Paris, which is a very glamorous place, but they would also walk the slums of Maputo in
Mhm.
Mozambique, where they saw us build the Ascend Academy, which is the charity that I still have, where the poorest of the poor living on under $2 a day in dirt floors, cement walls, and corrugated steel roofs, and zero opportunity. And they've been in those environments since birth. So because of that, they have so much more perspective, so much more anti-fragility to them. And yes, they will encounter pain and suffering in the world just like the rest of us, but they know how to navigate it. So it's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, fantastic. I'm glad you did, and I'm glad you raised those points because that's so very critical today. Because I think a lot of us and a lot of them are shielded
Yes.
from all
Yeah.
of this, right?
Mhm.
And I think that builds a kind of a bubble or a wall, and then
It creates weak
um,
people,
yeah,
basically. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Christian, this is fantastic having you. Wonderful getting in touch and doing this. It really, I think, the baseline that I use for my podcast is conversations that matter. I think so true. I think absolutely enlightening conversation, very insightful. I'm so glad we could do this.
Thank you,
Fun.
Jiten, and thank you for inviting me. And I'm very honored that I would be like a first interview in a new trend in your podcast. So
Absolutely, I love it, and what a start.